To understand the monumental impact of Ray of Light, we have to first understand the difficulty that preceded it. By late 1997, the music industry and tabloid media had written a very specific script for Madonna. She was approaching 40. In the unforgiving calculus of the pop music machine, this is usually the moment where the main pop girl transitions into the legacy act. The industry expected her to settle down. They expected safe, adult contemporary. After all, she'd spent the previous 4 years conducting a stabilization effort on her own career. The bedtime stories era of 1994 was a tactical retreat, an apparent softening of the image to thaw the radio freeze-out caused by the erotica backlash. It was followed by Evita, a project that earned her a Golden Globe and critical respectability, but at the cost of her edge. She had successfully rehabilitated her image, but in doing so, she'd become safe. Meanwhile, the ground beneath her was shifting. The charts had been radicalized by Alanis Morissette. The massive success of Jagged Little Pill had rewritten the rules of engagement, proving that angsty, raw, and uncomfortable emotional songwriting could dominate the mainstream. The other titans of the 90s were already adapting to this new reality. Mariah Carey had just stripped away the adult contemporary polish for the honey-soaked liberation of Butterfly. Janet Jackson had released The Velvet Rope, a harrowing, dark exploration of depression and intimacy. The era of the untouchable diva was dead. The audience wasn't asking for perfection anymore. They were demanding the real person behind the persona. In this climate, Madonna's polished, character-driven work in Evita suddenly felt out of step. The ecosystem had no place for another act. It demanded a confession. And in March 1998, Madonna answered that demand. Ray of Light wasn't just a pivot. It was an obliteration of expectations. It was a brave, left-field turn that functioned simultaneously as a commercial blockbuster and a profound spiritual dissertation. It took the underground sounds of trip-hop, techno, and ambient house, genres that were thriving in British basements, but ignored by American radio, and forced them into the global mainstream. In this deep dive, we're going to dissect the architecture of this masterpiece. We'll analyze the locker room studio sessions with William Orbit that redefined the sound of the late 90s. We'll break down the chart war with the Titanic soundtrack. And we'll look at how a visit to a hi-fi shop in Halifax, West Yorkshire proves the sonic depth of this record. I'm James. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if you're new around these parts. And this is the story of how the Queen of Pop killed her ego to reignite her career. The ideological foundation of Ray of Light wasn't built in a recording booth. It was built in a delivery room. In October 1996, Madonna gave birth to her daughter, Lourdes. This was the primary catalyst for a complete psychological restructuring. In her own words, this moment kicked her spiritual search into first gear.
The birth of my daughter was sort of a rebirth for me. It made me look at life in a completely new way. And it made me appreciate life in a way that I don't think I ever had before. Giving birth has affected me consciously, unconsciously, you name it.
For 15 years, her career had been fueled by a desperate need for attention and validation. And I mean that with no shade. Suddenly, she was responsible for another life, and the narcissism that fuels pop stardom began to feel hollow. She began asking the elemental questions. Why am I here, and what is all this for? And this existential crisis led her to the study of Kabbalah, Ashtangi yoga, and a deep immersion in Hinduism and Buddhism. She became obsessed with the concept of karma, the law of cause and effect, the idea that holding on to hate is a waste of energy. This new philosophy required a new sonic vocabulary. She couldn't express these ideas over the R&B loops of bedtime stories or the Broadway orchestration of Evita. She needed a sound that felt futuristic yet ancient. The recording process, stretching from June to November 1997 at Laura B. North Studios in California, began with a false start. Initially, she went with the sure thing. Babyface. He was the architect of her biggest hit of the decade, Take a Bow. They wrote 4 songs together. They were polite, they were well-crafted, and they were kind of boring. Madonna realized that repeating the bedtime stories formula would be like creative death, so she scrapped those sessions. She then worked with her old collaborators Rick Knowles and Patrick Leonard. They found some structural success, penning the skeletons of future classics like The Power of Goodbye. But the sonic identity, the skin that would cover these bones, was still missing. In her search for this new sound, Madonna admitted she was fishing around and explicitly reached out to the royalty of the British electronic scene. She contacted Nelly Hooper, Tricky, Goldie, and even The Prodigy. Any one of these collaborations would have resulted in a radically different sounding record. The breakthrough happened when Guy Oseary, the chairman of Maverick Records, handed her a digital audio tape from a British producer named William Orbit. Orbit was an avant-garde eccentric. He was known for his strange cargo ambient albums and his remixes, but he wasn't a hit maker in the traditional sense. He didn't use polished studio bands. He used an Atari ST computer and a sampler, building tracks layer by gritty layer. When Madonna heard the 13 tracks on that tape, she didn't hear pop songs. She heard the future.
So I said, why don't you send me some DATs or tapes or whatever, stuff you've been working on. I just want to know where your head's at, pick your brain and stuff. So he sent me music and I just flipped over it. And I said, oh my God, I've got to work with this guy now. So we started writing and we wrote Drowned World in one day and we hit it off really well. And I loved where it was coming from. And after we wrote about 5 songs together, I just said, you know what, I really like the sound of this, and this is what I want my record to sound like, and this is the person I want to work on it with.
The collaboration was intense. The studio environment at Larrabee North was described as grueling. Orbit and the engineers would work until they passed out, sleeping on the floor under the mixing desks.
The engineer and William were sleeping every night in the studio. And
Orbit described the creative process as fast and furious, noting that tracks would often morph like an amoeba, splitting from one idea into 2 distinct songs because they had too many ideas to contain in a single track. The schedule was so punishing that Orbit was forced to make a binary choice: chase the creative tangents or sleep. And he chose the tangents. His philosophy during the sessions was simple: sleep is expendable. You can sleep when you're dead. The studio ended up smelling like a locker room due to the lack of ventilation and the relentless hours of work.
Smelled like a locker room in there. It was really disgusting.
To maintain some semblance of sanity, Madonna instituted a strict, almost aristocratic ritual. Every day, the work would stop for exactly 30 minutes. They would sit in a formally set dining room with candlelight and name cards and eat a proper meal. It was a bizarre juxtaposition, the grimy, sweat-drenched creation of techno beats interrupted by a Victorian dinner party. The friction between them was real. Orbit was a tinkerer. He wanted to layer sounds forever. Madonna, on the other hand, was a creature of instinct. She wanted execution. She constantly used the phrase, "don't gild the lily," ordering Orbit to leave the mistakes, the breathy gasps, and the crackles in the mix. She realized that the electronic music needed to feel human, to connect. To understand why this album worked, we need to look at the tracks, not just as songs, but as chapters in a spiritual dissertation. Drowned World, Substitute for Love. The album opens with a retraction. The title references J.G. Ballard's apocalyptic novel, setting a tone of submersion. This is a trip-hop meditation where Madonna systematically dismantles her own mythology. She admits that the fame she spent a decade or more chasing was a substitute for love.
The song Drowned World definitely addresses that issue. The idea of fame is very seductive to people. A lot of people have a false impression that if you're famous, somehow you're going to feel this incredible sense of fulfillment and you're going to be truly loved and truly happy. I mean, and everyone who isn't famous thinks that's what happens to you when you're famous. But anyone who is famous could probably tell you that the opposite is true. In fact, if you aren't really truly fulfilled and you don't have intimacy in your life and you don't know how to love, then then thousands of people adoring you actually makes you feel emptier.
The production is spacious, starting with ambient noise before dropping into a heavy, slow, rolling beat. It's the sound of someone waking up from a long, intoxicating dream. The visual for this track was actually one of her most controversial. Directed by Walter Stern, the video features Madonna being chased by aggressive paparazzi on motorbikes. Released in August 1998, less than a year after the death of Princess Diana, the imagery drew uncomfortable comparisons. However, the video ends with a crucial scene. Madonna running home to embrace her daughter, bringing the visual narrative right back to the album's initial spark of inspiration. Swim introduces the album's recurring water motif, the ocean, as a mechanism for baptism and cleansing. The recording of this track carries a dark history. On July 15, 1997, the day Madonna was scheduled to record the vocals, her close friend Gianni Versace was murdered in Miami. The grief in the vocal performance is palpable. When she sings about carrying the sins of the world and washing them away, she isn't just singing about abstract concepts. She's processing real-time trauma. And then the energy shifts. The title track. This song is a masterclass in controlled chaos, based on an obscure 1971 folk track by Curtis Muldoon called Zephyrin.
Zephyr in the sky at night, I wonder, do your tears of morning sink beneath the sun?
Orbit transformed it into a tech pop juggernaut. The production here is legendary among audiophiles. The layers of analog synths, the galloping beat, the screeching electric guitar riff, it's a sonic wall. To illustrate the depth of this production, I have to get personal for a second. At the time, I was dating a guy who worked at a store that sold high-end speakers, and they had this dedicated listening room where the sound was completely dampened and you could really get a sense of what each set of speakers could do. And I remember sitting there when he put on Ray of Light on these massive professional-grade reference speakers, and it was a revelation. Suddenly, I was hearing textures and layers of the music that simply didn't exist on my speakers at home or in my headphones at the time. That specific moment didn't just change how I heard the song. It triggered my lifelong obsession with high-fidelity audio. It wasn't just a pop song anymore. It was a three-dimensional landscape. William Orbit knew exactly what he was doing with that density. He explicitly stated that he didn't want the album to just be catchy. He wanted it to be good for a lot of spins. He described his production technique as piling in layers that would act as hidden time bombs, little sonic details that listeners wouldn't even notice until 5 years down the line. He built the record to be discovered slowly over the years. Vocally, Orbit pushed her out of her comfort zone, forcing her to sing a semitone higher than usual, and the result is a performance that sounds strained and ecstatic and desperate, mirroring the lyrics about the universe moving faster than the speed of light. The video was just as frantic. She tapped the Swedish director Jonas Åkerlund to create a Koyaanisqatsi-style time-lapse travelogue. Filmed in LA, New York, and Stockholm, it perfectly captured the dizzying speed of modern life. It swept the 1998 MTV VMAs, taking Video of the Year, and it peaked at number 5 on the Billboard Hot 100, her highest debut ever at the time. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the architecture of 90s pop, please take a second to hit the like button. It helps the algorithm find other pop historians like us, and let me know in the comments. Do you prefer the erotica era Madonna or the Ray of Light spiritual Madonna? Candy Perfume Girl. This track brings in the grunge. Co-written with Susanna Melvoin, it blends 60s psych rock with industrial electronica. It's abrasive, addictive, and it uses the language of substance abuse to describe a lover, a magic poison. Skin is the album's underground heart, a 6-minute techno-acid trance epic. Orbit and Mariah utilized a sample of a Moroccan flute recorded in a marketplace to give it an exotic, disorienting texture. This is Madonna fully submitting to the ego death of the dance floor. Nothing really matters. Here, she explicitly addresses the listener. She admits, quote, "I was selfish. I was crash and burn." It's a love letter to her daughter set to a pounding house beat. It manages the difficult task of being deeply spiritual and an absolute club banger simultaneously. The visual, directed by Johan Renck, was a bizarre, high art concept inspired by Memoirs of a Geisha. It featured Madonna in a red Jean-Paul Gaultier kimono performing Buto-inspired choreography. While the song stalled at number 3 in the US due to a delayed release strategy, the imagery was so potent that it became the visual anchor for her Grammy performance and the subsequent tour. Track 7, Sky Fits Heaven. Well, that rhymes. This drum and bass infused track explores the concept of fate. The lyrics, partially lifted from a Gap commercial poem by Max Blagg, suggest that we are all guided by a higher hand. The sky fits heaven, so fly it. Shanti Ashtangi. This is perhaps the biggest risk on the album. A mainstream American pop star chanting a Sanskrit Vedic prayer over a techno beat. In 1998, this was unheard of. This wasn't just Madonna mimicking sounds she heard at yoga class. She actually took a crash course in Sanskrit specifically for this track. She described the lyrics as taking artistic license on 2 specific Vedic prayers from the 13th century. Her goal was to test the theory that the physical vibration of these specific words brings a feeling of bliss, regardless of whether the listener understands the literal translation. Frozen, the cinematic masterpiece. Frozen bridges the gap between the classical and the electronic. With its sweeping strings and gothic melody, it attacks the concept of emotional unavailability. It established the goth witch visual that would come to define the era. Directed by Chris Cunningham, the video was filmed in the bleak Mojave Desert, utilizing special effects to transform Madonna into a flock of crows and a Doberman. It was a massive commercial success, hitting number 2 in the US, blocked from the top spot only by Casey and JoJo's All My Life. In my 1998 main Pop Girl video, I talked about how this song and Titanic are intertwined in my mind. I always felt like Frozen was the alternative theme song to the movie rather than My Heart Will Go On. Track 10, The Power of Goodbye. A devastating ballad about detachment. Whether inspired by her marriage to Sean Penn or a general philosophical realization, this song posits that to truly own something, you must be willing to let it go. It's widely regarded as one of her finest vocal performances. Restrained, melancholy, and profound. The blue-tinted video, directed by Matthew Rolston, co-starred Goran Vishnich, who Madonna dubbed the sexiest man alive, playing a high-stakes game of chess, a perfect visual metaphor for the strategic end of a relationship. Track 11, To Have and Not to Hold. Continuing with that theme of emotional distance, track 11 introduces a murky, dark bossa nova rhythm to the album's diverse sonic palette. Re-teaming with Rick Knowles, Madonna explores the painful experience of loving someone who remains completely emotionally unavailable, creating a metaphorical barrier that prevents the relationship from growing. The production here is a brilliant change of pace. It's subtly vibrant, prioritizing restrained acoustic arrangements over heavy synthesizers to perfectly highlight that feeling of isolation. Track 12, Little Star, shifts the focus back to the catalyst of this entire era, her daughter, Lourdes. If Nothing Really Matters was the club banger tribute to her child, Little Star is the delicate techno lullaby. The production features a fast, complex drum and bass rhythm programmed by Mariah de Vries, which is beautifully juxtaposed against an upright bass and warm, ambient synths. Lyrically, it's a pure expression of maternal joy. She sings about her daughter being made of flesh and bones and promises to protect her, representing the emotional climax of the album's themes of motherhood and rebirth. Mergirl. The album ends not with a bang, but with a ghost story. Mergirl has no chorus. It's a spoken word hallucination over a glitchy, sparse beat. Madonna confronts the death of her mother, describing a run through a forest of burning flesh and rotting bones. It's the most raw, unvarnished moment of her career. Orbit recalls that after she recorded this vocal in a single take, the entire studio sat in stunned silence. When Ray of Light dropped in March 1998, the reaction was seismic. The album debuted at number 2 on the Billboard 200, moving a staggering 371,000 copies in its first week. This set a record for the highest first-week sales by a female artist in the SoundScan era. So why didn't it hit number 1? Because it ran headfirst into the biggest cultural object of the 1990s.
Iceberg, right ahead!
The Titanic soundtrack. Celine Dion's My Heart Will Go On was an immovable object. However, Ray of Light conquered the rest of the globe, hitting number 1 in 17 countries, including the UK, Germany, and Australia. To date, it has sold over 16 million copies. The promotion was a masterclass in rebranding. The harsh, plucked eyebrows and heavy makeup of the early 90s were gone. In their place emerged what critics and fans called the motherly goddess. She looked softer, ethereal, and lit from within. And the album almost had a completely different identity too. During the sessions, they cycled through about 20 different titles. It started as Sutra, but they felt that was too abstract. Then it became Mantra, which they scrapped for fear it was too dated. They even briefly considered Veronica Electronica, a title Madonna actually loved, but decided to save for a potential remix album that came out late last year. They finally landed on Ray of Light because, unlike the others, it offered a sense of hope rather than just a description of the sound. The campaign culminated at the 41st Annual Grammy Awards in February 1999. Madonna opened the show with Nothing Really Matters, dressed in a striking red Jean-Paul Gaultier kimono, and it was a victory lap. That night, she won 3 Grammys, including Best Pop Album, her first ever Grammy in a non-visual category.
And the Best Pop Album is Ray of Light, Madonna.
Jack McCarthy and David Wright.
This is such a surprise, and I'm so honored.
After years of being dismissed by the Recording Academy as merely a marketing genius, the industry was finally forced to bow to her musicality. Interestingly, the tour didn't happen immediately. Life intervened. A new movie, The Next Best Thing, a new husband, Guy Ritchie, and a second child, Rocco. It wasn't until June 2001 and after the release of her next album, Music, that she launched the Drowned World Tour. This was her first tour in 8 years, and the pent-up demand was hysterical. When tickets for the London Earls Court show went on sale, the phone lines practically melted. She sold out her entire 6-night residency, over 107,000 tickets, in a record-breaking 6 hours. In New York, scalpers were moving front row pairs for $7,000. It became the unobtainable ticket of the summer. If you were at this tour, let me know how amazing it was in the comments, because I'm very jealous. The show itself was a beast. Designed by Bruce Rogers, it was a machine on the move, requiring 2 Boeing 747s to transport. It was split into 4 distinct acts. Act 1, Rock and Roll Punk Girl, featuring kilts and gas masks. Act 2, Geisha Girl, a martial arts extravaganza where she performed Frozen in a kimono with 50-foot sleeves. Act 3, Cyber Cowgirl, inspired by the most recent album Music, where she was riding a mechanical bull, the perfect amalgamation of the 2 eras. And Act 4, Spanish Girl, celebrating her Latin influences with flamenco choreography. Despite only visiting Europe and North America, and controversially skipping Canada entirely, the numbers were staggering. Over just 47 sold-out shows, the tour played to 730,000 people and grossed $76.8 million. It finished the year as the highest-grossing tour by a solo artist worldwide, beating out every other pop star on the planet and trailing only the massive stadium treks of U2 and NSYNC. It proved that the new spiritual Madonna could still command a stadium just as effectively as the Like a Virgin era Madonna. The HBO broadcast of the Detroit show became the highest-rated concert special of the year, cementing the fact that even when she was underground, she was still the biggest show on earth. Ray of Light is more than just a successful album. It's the blueprint for the modern pop reinvention. Before this record, Electronica was seen as cold and distant and mechanical.
I love a lot of sort of techno music, but the thing about techno music is that you never think of it as being very emotional. So what I wanted to do was make it intimate, make it emotional, like sort of prove that it could be. And I was really looking forward to finally going into the studio and writing music that was my point of view, from my heart.
Madonna proved it could be warm, emotional, and deeply human. She brought the underground to the supermarket, paving the way for the EDM boom that would follow a decade later. But more importantly, she dismantled the age barrier. She proved that a female pop star approaching 40 didn't have to retreat to the nostalgia circuit. She didn't have to play it safe. She could remain at the bleeding edge of the avant-garde. Ray of Light remains Madonna's magnum opus because it represents the moment she stopped looking at the charts and started looking inward. She took the cheese, the drama, and the ego, and she dissolved them in the ocean. And in doing so, she finally found the light. And before I sign off, I want to leave you with one final thought. Making this deep dive actually made me realize something about my own history with music. Before Ray of Light, my relationship with pop music was pretty simple. I knew music could be fun. I knew it could make me dance or help me get over a broken heart. It was functional. But this was the specific album that taught me that music could be something else entirely. It was the first time I realized that a pop record could be profound. It taught me that a song could be a massive radio hit, but still carry a message about karma or grief or the nature of the universe. It bridged the gap for me. It showed me that you could have a spiritual dissertation hidden inside a synthesizer loop. In a lot of ways, this channel exists because of records like this. Albums that taught me to dig deeper and to realize that if you listen closely enough, pop music isn't just background noise. It's a philosophy class you can dance to. That is the story of Ray of Light. If you enjoyed this analysis, please check out my deep dive on bedtime stories to see how she set the stage for this comeback. And if you want to support the channel, the link is in the description below. I'll see you in the next deep dive.